The end of the conclusion circles back to where this story began, with the simple but devastating question of identity. Who are we when the truths we have believed all our lives are stripped away? For Harry, that question is no longer hypothetical. It is lived reality. For the monarchy, it is a question of survival. Can an institution built on bloodlines survive when those bloodlines are doubted? For the public, it is a question of empathy. Do we see Harry as a scandal, or do we see him as a man grappling with truths no one should face alone? The answers will not come quickly, and perhaps they will never come fully. But the story of Harry's collapse, of Charles under fire, of Diana's legacy, of William's silence, and of Meghan's position has left an indelible mark on history. And so the conclusion leaves us not with closure, but with reflection. The monarchy may endure, Harry may rebuild, and the world may move on to other scandals. But this story will remain, a reminder that even the most powerful institutions are fragile, that even the most carefully protected myths can shatter, and that even a prince can collapse under the weight of truth. The crown endures because it adapts, but the crack in its foundation is now permanent. Harry endures because he is human, but the cost of that humanity is pain. And the public endures because they cannot look away, because in Harry's story they see something of their own. The search for truth, the struggle for identity, and the hope that even after collapse, it is possible to rise again. The beginning of expert commentary focused on royal historians. They reminded the world that speculation about Harry's paternity was not new. For decades, whispers of James Hewitt as a possible father had circulated, fed by tabloids, and the striking resemblance between the two men. Historians pointed out that Diana herself had admitted to her affair with Hewitt, though she claimed it began after Harry's birth. These scholars highlighted that such rumors had plagued the monarchy before. Illegitimacy has always been a shadow lurking over royal history. From medieval kings whose heirs were questioned to 19th-century scandals hushed up behind palace walls, the continuity of monarchy has often relied not on truth, but on the perception of legitimacy. In this sense, the revelation was not unprecedented. It was another chapter in a long story of rumor and secrecy. Yet, as historians emphasized, the difference in the modern age was the existence of science and global media. DNA testing and instant communication meant that this was no longer a whisper in drawing rooms. It was a headline worldwide. The middle of expert analysis turned to psychology and identity. Psychologists were called upon to explain the devastating impact such a revelation could have on Harry. They spoke of identity collapse, the shattering of a foundational belief about oneself. For Harry, learning that Charles may not be his father would not only alter his sense of self, but also reopen the trauma of losing Diana. Experts on grief pointed out that such revelations often compound earlier losses, creating a chain reaction of pain. Harry had built much of his identity on the memory of his mother and his rebellion against his father. Now, that rebellion was reframed. Not rebellion against a father, but rebellion against a man who might never have been his father at all. For psychologists, this explained his collapse. It was not just shock, but a total breakdown of narrative identity, the story each person tells themselves about who they are and where they come from. Legal experts also entered the conversation, dissecting what the revelation meant for Harry's position within the monarchy. They explained that under British law, legitimacy is tied to the marriage, not the biology. Because Harry was born during the lawful union of Charles and Diana, he remains legally a legitimate Windsor. His place in the line of succession is therefore unchanged. Yet these same experts acknowledge that perception is as important as legality in matters of monarchy. A crown that exists primarily as a symbol cannot afford to have its symbolism questioned. Even if Harry's place is legally secure, the doubt cast by the DNA revelation undermines the mythology of continuity that sustains the monarchy. In the court of public opinion, legality may matter less than belief, and once belief is broken, it is nearly impossible to restore. Royal commentators, those who have made careers reporting on and interpreting the Windsors, offered a different perspective. Many framed the revelation as an existential threat to the monarchy's image. They argued that the institution had barely survived the crises of the 1990s, the divorces, the scandals, and Diana's death. Queen Elizabeth's steady presence had helped it recover, but with her gone, the monarchy lacked the same stabilizing figure. Charles, already unpopular with segments of the public, was ill-equipped to handle a scandal of this magnitude. Commentators predicted that the revelation would accelerate the monarchy's decline, particularly among younger generations less attached to tradition. For them, Harry's pain symbolized the failure of an institution that had always placed duty above humanity, secrecy above truth. Historians of Diana added another layer of analysis. They revisited her life, her relationships, and her public confessions. Some argued that the DNA revelation vindicated her, proving that she had sought love outside her marriage for good reason. Others cautioned that it distorted her legacy, turning her into a figure defined by scandal rather than by her compassion and humanitarian work. The debate among Diana's biographers revealed the difficulty of separating fact from myth, love from rumor, and truth from narrative. Yet all agreed that the revelation ensured that Diana's story would continue to shape the monarchy long after her death. She remained the lens through which Harry was understood, and the DNA scandal only magnified that influence. The middle of expert commentary also veered into geopolitics. Scholars of international relations noted that the monarchy, though largely ceremonial, plays a role in Britain's soft power and in the cohesion of the Commonwealth. A scandal undermining its legitimacy weakened its symbolic value abroad. Countries already questioning their ties to the crown, such as Australia, Canada, and Caribbean nations, could seize on the DNA revelation as further justification for moving toward republicanism. The monarchy's stability at home, therefore, had global implications. The revelation was not just a family scandal, it was a diplomatic concern. The end of expert opinion and historical commentary reveals a sobering conclusion. While the monarchy has weathered scandals before, this one strikes at its most fundamental myth, the bloodline. Experts agree that whether the DNA revelation is true or not, the damage to perception is irreversible. Harry's identity will forever be questioned, his children's place forever debated, and the monarchy's image forever weakened. Royal historians predict that the scandal will join the abdication of Edward VIII and the death of Diana as one of the defining crises of modern royal history. Psychologists warn that Harry's collapse may mark the beginning of a long struggle with identity and belonging. Legal experts insist that nothing changes on paper, but acknowledge that the paper matters less than the perception. Together, these voices shape the narrative into something larger than scandal. They reveal how one man's personal revelation touches on psychology, history, law, politics, and culture. They show how Harry's collapse is not just a family tragedy, but a moment of institutional reckoning. And they remind the world that the monarchy, despite its pomp and tradition, is ultimately fragile, sustained less by divine right than by belief. When belief falters, no expert can repair it. That is the conclusion of Section 14. That the monarchy has entered uncharted territory, and that the voices of historians and experts, though varied, all converge on one truth. Nothing will ever be the same again. What happens next? Ensuring it reaches at least 2,000 words, structured with a clear beginning, middle, and end, filled with gripping detail, no fluff. The question on everyone's lips after the DNA revelation and Harry's collapse was simple, yet monumental. What happens next? The monarchy thrives on stability, on the illusion that no matter what storms rage around it, the crown remains untouched. But this scandal has destabilized that illusion, shaking not only Harry's world but the entire institution. The future now feels uncertain, with multiple paths possible, each carrying profound consequences for Harry, his family, and the monarchy itself. To look at what happens next, one must consider the personal choices Harry may make, the strategies the monarchy may adopt, and the broader implications for the public and global stage. The beginning of this uncertain future lies with Harry himself. His immediate collapse spoke volumes about the depth of his shock, but recovery requires action. One possible path for Harry is withdrawal. Having already distanced himself from the monarchy by stepping down from royal duties, he could retreat even further, cutting all ties to the family and focusing solely on his life in America with Meghan and their children. In this scenario, Harry would effectively close the door on any reconciliation, choosing instead to rebuild his identity outside the shadow of the crown. He could pour his energy into philanthropic work, mental health advocacy, and media projects, using his platform to reshape himself not as a prince, but as a private citizen. The DNA revelation, painful though it is, could serve as the final severing of chains that have bound him since birth. The middle of Harry's path, however, suggests a different possibility. Rather than retreat, he could choose confrontation. Harry has already shown a willingness to speak publicly about the monarchy's failings, from interviews with Oprah to his memoirs. The DNA revelation could fuel him to go further, to expose what he sees as the institution's hypocrisy, secrecy, and cruelty. He could demand answers about what Charles knew, about what Diana may have hidden, about how the palace has handled the rumors for decades. In this path, Harry becomes not just a victim but a whistleblower, turning his personal pain into a weapon against the monarchy. The risk of this approach is obvious. It would deepen the rift with his family and invite even harsher criticism. But for Harry, who has always positioned himself as someone who values truth over tradition, this path might feel inevitable. A third possibility lies somewhere between retreat and confrontation. Harry could seek healing, both personally and within his family. Though the revelation is devastating, he could use it as an opportunity to rebuild relationships on new, more honest foundations. He could confront Charles privately, demanding answers, but also seeking reconciliation. He could reach out to William, acknowledging their differences, but trying to salvage some part of their brotherhood. This path would be the hardest, requiring forgiveness and vulnerability at a time when anger and betrayal feel overwhelming. Yet, if achieved, it could be transformative, not only for Harry but for the monarchy itself, offering a rare moment of honesty in an institution built on silence. The middle of what happens next also involves the monarchy's response. For King Charles, the scandal presents a nearly impossible challenge. Silence has long been the monarchy's weapon of choice, but silence in the digital age is increasingly interpreted as guilt. If Charles remains silent, speculation will grow unchecked. If he speaks, he risks confirming truths that could destroy what little authority he has. Advisors may urge him to issue a carefully worded statement, one that expresses love for Harry without addressing the DNA revelation directly. Such a statement could emphasize that Harry is his son in every way that matters, regardless of biology, framing the issue as a private family matter rather than a constitutional crisis. The effectiveness of this strategy would depend on public reception, but it offers the monarchy a way to show humanity without undermining stability. Another strategy the monarchy might pursue is distraction. Historically, the crown has often weathered scandals by shifting public attention to other events, state visits, charity initiatives, weddings, or celebrations. In this case, William and Kate could be deployed more visibly, their family presented as the future of the monarchy. By emphasizing William's legitimacy and stability, the crown could attempt to redirect focus away from Harry. This approach carries risks, however. It could be seen as callous, as though the monarchy is ignoring Harry's pain while exploiting the scandal to strengthen William's image. Yet in the calculus of survival, such strategies are not new. The monarchy has always prioritized the crown over the individual. The end of this discussion of what happens next expands beyond Harry and the monarchy to the public and the global stage. For the public, the revelation forces a re-evaluation of their relationship with the monarchy. For some, the scandal will deepen disillusionment, reinforcing the view that the institution is outdated and dishonest. For others, it will inspire sympathy for Harry, strengthening their emotional connection to him and weakening their support for Charles. In Commonwealth nations already questioning their ties to the crown, the scandal could accelerate moves toward republicanism. Leaders may frame the revelation as evidence that the monarchy no longer embodies stability or continuity, making it easier to argue for independence. Globally, the scandal could also reshape perceptions of royalty itself. For centuries, monarchies have survived by presenting themselves as symbols of divine continuity, separate from the chaos of ordinary politics. The DNA revelation strips away that illusion, reminding the world that royals are as vulnerable to scandal, betrayal, and doubt as anyone else. For Republicans, this is proof of monarchy's irrelevance. For monarchists, it is a test of resilience. The outcome will depend not just on what Harry does, but on how the monarchy responds and how the public interprets those responses. In the end, what happens next is not a single path, but a series of possibilities, each with profound consequences. Harry may retreat, confront, or reconcile. The monarchy may remain silent, issue statements, or distract. The public may lose faith, rally around Harry, or harden their support for William. The global stage may turn away from monarchy altogether, or it may treat this as another scandal in a long history of scandals. What is certain is that the revelation has changed the future irrevocably. Harry's identity will forever be questioned, the monarchy's legitimacy will forever be doubted, and Diana's legacy will forever be revisited. The DNA revelation was not the end of a story, but the beginning of a new chapter, one defined by uncertainty, choice, and the possibility of transformation. Whether that transformation leads to healing or collapse remains unknown. But for Harry, for Charles, for William, and for the monarchy itself, the next steps will determine not only their own futures but the future of an institution that has stood for centuries. The revelation that Prince Harry may not be King Charles's biological son has rewritten the story of the monarchy in ways no one could have predicted. It began as whispers, evolved into decades of speculation, and finally erupted into a moment of undeniable confrontation when alleged DNA results surfaced. Harry's collapse became the defining image, a symbol of personal devastation and institutional fragility. But now that the story has unfolded through rumor, reaction, and consequence, the question remains, what does it all mean? The conclusion is not about tying the story neatly together, because the reality is far too messy for that. Instead, it is about reflecting on the truths revealed, the illusions shattered, and the lessons left behind for Harry, for the monarchy, and for the millions who have watched the drama play out. The beginning of this conclusion focuses on Harry himself. His journey has always been one of conflict, between duty and freedom, tradition and individuality, family loyalty and personal truth. The DNA revelation pushed that conflict to its breaking point. His collapse was not weakness but the human response to a burden no one could carry without breaking. It was the culmination of years of suspicion, grief, and identity struggles. For Harry, the path forward is uncertain, but one thing is clear. His life will never return to what it was. He can no longer pretend to be the prince he once was. Whether he embraces exile, confrontation, or reconciliation, he must now rebuild himself from the ground up, not as a royal defined by birthright, but as a man defined by truth. The lesson of his collapse is universal, that even the strongest images can shatter when the foundation of identity is stripped away. The middle of this conclusion examines the monarchy. For centuries, the crown has survived on the power of perception. Its authority lies not in law or politics, but in the belief that it represents an unbroken chain of legitimacy. The DNA revelation struck at the heart of that illusion. Even if the law keeps Harry in the line of succession, even if advisors insist that nothing changes, the public's belief has been shaken. And once shaken, it cannot be fully restored. The monarchy may continue, propped up by ceremony and tradition, but the crack in its foundation will always remain visible. Every photograph of Harry, every mention of Diana, every debate about legitimacy will carry the shadow of this revelation. The institution has weathered many storms, but this one is different. It is not about scandal and behavior. It is about scandal and blood, the very thing monarchy is built upon. The conclusion for the monarchy is not collapse, at least not yet, but it is fragility, a vulnerability more exposed than ever before. The middle also brings Diana back into focus. Her legacy has been revisited, reframed, and reinterpreted once again in light of this revelation. She remains the figure at the center of it all, the woman whose choices and struggles continue to define her sons and the institution she once belonged to. For some, the DNA revelation vindicates her, proving that she sought love outside her marriage because Charles never gave it. For others, it complicates her, raising questions about secrecy and betrayal. But regardless of interpretation, Diana's legacy endures. She remains the lens through which the world views Harry, the ghost haunting Charles's reign, the mother whose shadow looms over William's future. The conclusion about Diana is not whether she knew or whether she did not, but that her story continues to matter more than the monarchy's efforts to silence it. The conclusion also asks a larger question. What is the future of monarchy in a world where truth cannot be controlled? The DNA revelation was not something the palace could spin, bury, or silence. It emerged in an era where leaks move at the speed of light, where social media amplifies every whisper into a roar, and where belief is shaped less by official statements than by memes and speculation. The monarchy, once protected by secrecy, is now exposed to a world that demands transparency. Can it survive in such a world? Perhaps. But it will never again enjoy the same unquestioned reverence it once held. The crown may endure, but it endures now in doubt, not certainty. The end of the conclusion circles back to where this story began, with the simple but devastating question of identity. Who are we when the truths we have believed all our lives are stripped away? For Harry, that question is no longer hypothetical. It is lived reality. For the monarchy, it is a question of survival. Can an institution built on bloodlines survive when those bloodlines are doubted? For the public, it is a question of empathy. Do we see Harry as a scandal, or do we see him as a man grappling with truths no one should face alone? The answers will not come quickly, and perhaps they will never come fully. But the story of Harry's collapse, of Charles under fire, of Diana's leg. The beginning of this media machine reaction lay in the tabloid press. Within hours of the revelation, British newspapers splashed sensational headlines across their front pages. The Sun, the Daily Mail, and other outlets ran side-by-side comparisons of Harry and James Hewitt, reigniting decades-old claims of resemblance. Television programs brought in body language experts and royal insiders to speculate on what the DNA results meant for Harry, for Charles, and for the monarchy. The tone was relentless, and nuance was abandoned in favor of the most sensational interpretations. The idea that a prince's very identity could be a lie was too irresistible to downplay. The press, already adept at mining every aspect of Harry and Meghan's lives for clicks, now had a narrative that promised weeks, even months, of stories. The middle of the media machine's role was its blending of news with conspiracy. Once the story entered the bloodstream of global media, it became impossible to separate credible reporting from wild speculation. Social media influencers, YouTubers, and bloggers created endless streams of content, each claiming to reveal hidden truths. Conspiracy theories multiplied. Some argued that the palace itself had orchestrated the leak to discredit Harry and Meghan. Others insisted that Meghan had engineered the DNA test as part of her battle against the institution. More extreme voices suggested that the test was fabricated altogether, part of a larger plot by foreign powers to destabilize Britain by undermining its monarchy. Each theory found its audience, and each added another layer of intrigue to an already chaotic story. The conspiracy theories often relied on selective evidence. Old interviews with Diana were replayed, her words mined for hidden clues. Photographs of her with James Hewitt resurfaced, with captions suggesting secret meetings and timelines that contradicted official accounts. Others pointed to inconsistencies in Harry's treatment within the family, interpreting them as proof that the palace always knew he was different. Online forums filled with debates about genetics, timelines, and secret royal cover-ups. Every piece of information, no matter how small, became evidence for one theory or another. The truth was lost in the noise, replaced by a kaleidoscope of competing narratives that served the public's insatiable appetite for scandal. The middle also saw the internationalization of the story. In the United States, networks like CNN and Fox News treated the scandal as both news and entertainment. Talk shows debated whether the monarchy could survive in the modern era, while late-night comedians turned the DNA revelation into punchlines. In Europe, where monarchies still exist, the story raised uncomfortable questions about their own institutions. In Commonwealth countries, the scandal was seen as further proof of the monarchy's irrelevance. Across the globe, the media machine ensured that Harry's personal tragedy became public property, dissected and debated by millions who had never met him but who felt entitled to judge his life. The end of the media machine's handling of the scandal reveals the dangers of such relentless coverage. The constant repetition of rumors, the amplification of conspiracies, and the absence of clear facts created an environment where perception became reality. For many, the DNA revelation was not a question to be investigated, but a truth to be accepted, regardless of its authenticity. Harry's collapse, replayed endlessly across television and online platforms, became the defining image of the story. The media had transformed a man's personal crisis into a global spectacle, stripping it of nuance and humanity. The conspiracy theories, meanwhile, ensured that the story would never truly die. Even if evidence emerged to refute the DNA claims, millions would continue to believe them because the narrative was too powerful, too entertaining, and too deeply embedded in the public consciousness to disappear. For Harry, the media machine was both familiar and unbearable. He had grown up in its glare, his every mistake amplified, his every triumph diminished. He had watched it destroy his mother, turning her into both a saint and a target. Now, it had turned his deepest identity crisis into the biggest headline in the world. For the monarchy, the media machine revealed its vulnerability. The institution had once controlled its narrative through careful relationships with the press, but the rise of digital platforms and social media had shattered that control. The DNA revelation was not just a scandal. It was a case study in how modern media can magnify and distort reality beyond recognition. In the end, the role of the media and the proliferation of conspiracies ensured that the scandal would endure. Even if the palace eventually issued a definitive statement, even if the truth were clarified, the damage was already done. The conspiracy theories would remain, fueling books, documentaries, and endless online debates. The media machine had done its work. It had transformed speculation into permanence, and it had ensured that Harry's identity would forever be questioned, his collapse forever replayed. For the public, it was entertainment. For Harry, it was devastation. And for the monarchy, it was another sign that its ability to control its image had collapsed in the face of a world that thrives on scandal and conspiracies. The line of succession debate, ensuring it reaches at least 2,000 words, structured with a strong beginning, middle, and end, rich in detail, without fluff. The revelation about Prince Harry's bloodline inevitably ignited a debate over the line of succession. The monarchy's survival depends on the notion of continuity, on the unbroken passing of the crown from one legitimate heir to the next. It is a system rooted in bloodlines, and even in a modern era where the crown holds little political power, the symbolism of blood remains central to its authority. If that bloodline is disrupted, if a prince is revealed not to share the blood of the monarch, what does that mean for his place in the royal hierarchy? More importantly, what does it mean for the institution itself, which relies on perception as much as legality? The DNA revelation forced scholars, journalists, and the public to confront these questions with renewed urgency, and the debate was as fierce as it was complicated. The beginning of the debate focused on technicalities. Under British law, the line of succession is established by descent from the Electress Sophia of Hanover, formalized in the Act of Settlement of 1701 and amended by subsequent legislation. What matters is legitimacy at birth, not biological proof of paternity. In Harry's case, he was born during the lawful marriage of Charles and Diana, and under the law, that makes him a legitimate child of the union. Therefore, his place in the line of succession is legally secure, regardless of biology. At least on paper, Harry remains in the line, as do his children. But law and perception are not the same. The debate quickly shifted from what the law says to what the public believes. If millions believe Harry is not Charles's son, then the legitimacy of his position is weakened in practice, even if it remains intact in theory. The middle of the debate was dominated by questions of fairness and symbolism. For some, the revelation meant that Harry's place in the line of succession should be reconsidered. Even if the law recognized him as legitimate, the monarchy's moral authority depends on the idea of an unbroken bloodline. If Harry is not of Windsor blood, they argued, then his continued presence in the line undermines the institution's integrity. Others countered that removing him would be both cruel and unnecessary. Harry has already distanced himself from royal duties, and his chances of ever ascending the throne are practically non-existent, given his position behind William and William's children. To strip him of his place would serve no practical purpose and would only inflame the scandal further. For these voices, The revelation changed nothing about the line of succession in practice, even if it altered the story in the public imagination. The debate also raised questions about Harry's children. Archie and Lilibet, already at the margins of royal recognition, now found their futures further complicated. If their father's bloodline was in doubt, what did that mean for their own legitimacy within the monarchy? For supporters of Harry and Meghan, the answer was simple. The children should not be punished for circumstances beyond their control. They argued that the monarchy had already treated them unfairly, withholding full recognition and security. The DNA revelation, they said, was irrelevant to their rights. Critics, however, suggested that the revelation made their tenuous connection to the monarchy even weaker. Without Charles's blood running through their veins, they were even further removed from the symbolic continuity of the crown. The debate revealed the harsh reality of monarchy. Identity is not just personal, but institutional, and children born into it cannot escape the weight of blood. The middle also revealed deeper tensions about the relevance of the monarchy itself. For Republicans, the revelation was proof that the institution was outdated, dependent on myths of blood and legitimacy that have no place in a modern democracy. They argued that the scandal showed how fragile the monarchy's foundations truly are, that one DNA test could throw centuries of tradition into doubt. For monarchists, the debate was more about survival. They insisted that the law was clear, that Harry's place in the line was secure, and that the institution must move on without dwelling on personal scandals. The clash between these perspectives ensured that the succession debate was not just about Harry, but about the monarchy's place in the 21st century. The end of the debate revealed the impossibility of resolution. Legally, Harry remains in the line of succession. Symbolically, however, his place is forever questioned. Every discussion of the monarchy's future will now include a footnote about Harry's identity, a shadow that cannot be erased. His children, too, will grow up under that shadow, their legitimacy debated by people who have never met them. For the monarchy, this is the real danger of the revelation. Not that Harry will lose his place. He was unlikely to use it anyway. But that the idea of continuity, the illusion of an unbroken chain of blood, has been shattered in the public imagination. The debate over succession is less about law than about trust. And once that trust is broken, no amount of legal clarity can restore it. The line of succession debate is ultimately a reminder of how fragile the monarchy's foundations are. It is built not on law alone, but on perception, on the belief that bloodlines matter, that legitimacy is unquestionable, that history flows in a straight line from one monarch to the next. The DNA revelation exposed the cracks in that foundation, forcing the public to confront uncomfortable truths. For Harry, it meant his identity was no longer his own, but a question for the world to answer. For the monarchy, it meant the story of legitimacy could no longer be told without qualification. And for the world, it meant that the crown, once seen as eternal, was revealed to be as vulnerable to doubt and scandal as any other institution. The public's emotional connection to Harry, ensuring it reaches at least 2,000 words, structured with a beginning, middle, and end, rich in detail, without fluff. From the moment he was born, Prince Harry has been more than just a royal figure. To millions of people across the globe, he has been a symbol, sometimes of rebellion, sometimes of vulnerability, sometimes of tragedy. Unlike other royals who often seemed distant and untouchable, Harry was seen as relatable, as someone who wore his emotions on his sleeve and whose flaws made him human. That humanity is what forged the public's emotional connection to him, and it is what has made the revelation about his bloodline so devastating not just for him, but for the millions who feel as though they have shared his journey. To understand why this scandal resonates so deeply, one must examine how the public's relationship with Harry has evolved and why his story feels personal to so many. The beginning of this connection lies in Harry's childhood. From the earliest days, he was the spare, the second son, overshadowed by his brother William, the heir. Yet where William was reserved and disciplined, Harry was mischievous and spontaneous. His cheeky grin, his playful nature, and his occasional defiance made him endearing. People saw in him a child who, despite the weight of his title, behaved like any other boy. That relatability only grew when tragedy struck. The death of Princess Diana in 1997 marked a turning point in Harry's relationship with the public. The image of the young prince walking behind his mother's coffin, his head bowed in grief, etched itself into the world's memory. From that moment on, Harry was not just a royal. He was a boy who had lost his mother, and millions felt a protective instinct toward him. The middle of this connection developed during Harry's adolescence and young adulthood, when he became known as the Wild Prince. His mistakes were well documented: late-night parties, controversial costumes, and reckless behavior. Yet, even in scandal, the public's connection to him did not break. Instead, many saw him as a young man struggling under immense pressure, acting out in ways that felt familiar to anyone who had been young and reckless themselves. Where other royals appeared polished and untouchable, Harry appeared real. He stumbled, he erred, but he did so in ways that people recognized in themselves or their children. The media mocked him, but the public, for the most part, forgave him. That forgiveness was rooted in the emotional bond established during his childhood grief. People wanted Harry to find happiness, to grow beyond the pain that had defined his youth. His decision to serve in the military only deepened this bond. Unlike many royals who spoke of duty but lived lives insulated from real danger, Harry served on the front lines in Afghanistan. He flew helicopters, lived among soldiers, and placed himself in genuine risk. This decision earned him respect not just in Britain but worldwide. For many, it was proof that he was more than a title, that he was willing to act with courage and commitment. His military service added a layer of authenticity to his story, reinforcing the sense that Harry was not like other royals. He was relatable, he was flawed, but he was also brave. The public's emotional connection grew stronger, as people saw in him both vulnerability and strength. The relationship between Harry and the public shifted again with his marriage to Meghan Markle. For some, it was a fairy tale, a prince marrying for love, choosing a partner outside the constraints of tradition. For others, it was the beginning of controversy, as Meghan's background and independence clashed with the expectations of the monarchy. Through it all, Harry's emotional openness remained central to his public image. He spoke candidly about mental health, about the trauma of losing his mother, about the struggles of living under constant scrutiny. This candor resonated deeply with people who had experienced loss, anxiety, or depression themselves. They saw in Harry a prince who was not pretending to be perfect, but who admitted to being human. That admission made him loved, even as it made him controversial. The revelation about his bloodline tapped directly into this emotional connection. The public's reaction was not limited to curiosity or scandal. It was deeply personal. People felt his pain because they had walked alongside him, at least in spirit, through his childhood grief, his youthful mistakes, his military service, and his candid struggles with mental health. The idea that he collapsed upon learning the truth struck a chord because it felt like the culmination of a lifetime of hardship. For many, Harry's story is not just about royalty. It is about resilience in the face of loss, honesty in the face of scrutiny, and humanity in the face of expectation. The DNA revelation was devastating not only because of what it said about the monarchy, but because of what it did to Harry, the boy they had once mourned with, the man they had once cheered for. The middle of the public's emotional connection during this scandal has been empathy. Social media overflowed with messages of support, with people expressing heartbreak at Harry's collapse. Mental health advocates pointed out the trauma of such a revelation, emphasizing the courage it took for Harry to confront it. For many, the scandal became a mirror for their own lives. Families around the world have dealt with secrets of paternity, with revelations about identity that shook them to their core. Seeing Harry endure this on a global stage made those private struggles visible, and people related to him more than ever. The connection was no longer just about royalty. It was about humanity, about the universal desire to know who we are and where we come from. But the end of this section reveals that the connection is also tinged with sorrow. For all the empathy, for all the support, the public cannot shield Harry from the consequences of the revelation. They can feel his pain, but they cannot erase it. They can love him, but they cannot repair the fracture in his identity. The emotional connection is real, but it is also powerless. Harry's story belongs to the world, but his suffering belongs to him alone. This paradox is what makes the public's bond with him so enduring and so tragic. People love him because he is human, but his humanity ensures that his pain is real, not a story that can be neatly resolved. The DNA revelation has deepened the connection, but it has also deepened the tragedy. For Harry, being loved by millions is both a gift and a burden, for their empathy cannot undo the truth that has shattered his world. Expert opinions and royal historians, ensuring it reaches at least 2,000 words with a clear beginning, middle, and end, packed with detail, without fluff. When the DNA revelation about Prince Harry erupted across the globe, it was not only the public who reacted with shock and emotion. Experts, historians, and commentators were quickly drawn into the debate, asked to provide context, analysis, and perspective. Their voices mattered because the monarchy is more than a family. It is an institution tied to centuries of history, tradition, and symbolism. Understanding the implications of Harry's alleged parentage required not just emotion but expertise, and across television studios, newspapers, podcasts, and academic circles, historians and analysts attempted to unravel what this revelation meant for Harry, for the monarchy, and for the legacy of Diana. The beginning of William's reaction can be traced to his lifelong bond with Harry. As children, the two were inseparable, bound together by the unique experience of growing up under royal scrutiny and by the tragedy of losing their mother at a young age. Diana's death forged a connection between them that few could understand. But as they grew older, their paths diverged. William embraced the role of heir, accepting the discipline and restrictions that came with it. Harry, in contrast, resisted, preferring freedom, adventure, and later, rebellion. The bond between them frayed, but it never fully disappeared. That history meant that when the DNA revelation surfaced, William's first reaction was not triumph or relief, but shock. For all their differences, Harry was his brother, and the collapse of Harry's identity struck William at a personal level. The middle of William's reaction was defined by conflict. As heir to the throne, his first responsibility was to the monarchy. The DNA revelation, while devastating to Harry, also represented a potential threat to the institution itself. If the public began to doubt the legitimacy of royal bloodlines, the monarchy's already fragile credibility would suffer further. William understood this better than anyone. His advisors likely urged him to remain silent, to project calm, and to allow the storm to pass without feeding it. Privately, however, William was torn. He could not ignore the image of his brother collapsing under the weight of truth. He could not erase the years of shared childhood memories, the bond forged in grief. Yet he also could not publicly stand by Harry without undermining the stability of the institution he was destined to lead. This inner conflict defined his reaction. Sympathy kept behind palace walls, silence maintained in public. Observers noted that William's silence was itself telling. While the world clamored for his voice, he offered none. Some interpreted this as coldness, evidence of the growing rift between the brothers. Others saw it as discipline, proof that he understood the gravity of his position. The truth likely lay somewhere in between. William knew that anything he said would be weaponized by supporters of Harry, by critics of the monarchy, by the media eager for more headlines. Silence was safer, but it came at a cost. To Harry, the absence of his brother's support may have felt like betrayal, another wound added to an already unbearable collapse. For the public, the silence only deepened the perception that the brothers' bond had been irreparably broken. The emotional side of William's reaction, though hidden, cannot be overlooked. Sources close to the family suggested that William felt a mix of guilt and sorrow. Guilt, because he recognized that his role as heir had always overshadowed Harry, and that the DNA revelation only widened the gap between them. Sorrow, because he knew that whatever chance remained for reconciliation was slipping away. William had always hoped, perhaps, that time would heal their feud, that eventually Harry would return to the fold in some capacity. The DNA scandal shattered that hope. With Harry's legitimacy now in question, the path back to unity seemed almost impossible. Yet there was also a practical side to William's reaction. The revelation reinforced his position as the undisputed heir, the future of the monarchy. For years, critics of the institution had suggested that William should take the throne sooner rather than later, bypassing Charles. Now, With Harry's identity in question, William's legitimacy was stronger than ever. His bloodline was unquestionable, his future secure. Advisors likely encouraged him to use this moment to project strength, to show himself as steady and reliable in contrast to the chaos surrounding Harry. William understood the importance of image, and in the weeks following the revelation, he appeared in public engagements with a calm demeanor, projecting normalcy even as his family reeled. It was a performance of duty, but behind it lay the storm of emotions he could not show. The end of William's reaction is ultimately defined by distance. While he may have felt sympathy for his brother, his public stance remained one of silence and composure. He chose the monarchy over personal reconciliation, duty over brotherhood. In doing so, he reinforced the very dynamic that had always defined their relationship. William as the heir, bound to the crown, and Harry as the outsider, struggling with identity. The DNA revelation did not create this divide, but it solidified it. For William, the path forward was clear. He would protect the monarchy at all costs. For Harry, the collapse meant further estrangement, a confirmation that even his brother could not or would not stand by him in his darkest hour. William's reaction reveals the tragic reality at the heart of the scandal. Two brothers, once inseparable, now stand on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide. One represents continuity, tradition, and legitimacy. The other represents doubt, rebellion, and the collapse of identity. The DNA revelation did not just expose the cracks in the monarchy, it exposed the cracks in their relationship, cracks that may never heal. For the monarchy, William's silence was a victory, a sign of discipline and stability. For Harry, it was another loss, another betrayal, another reminder that he was truly alone in his struggle. And for the world, it was a heartbreaking confirmation that the brothers who once symbolized the future of the monarchy together now stood as symbols of division. King Charles under fire, ensuring it reaches at least 2,000 words, with a clear beginning, middle, and end, rich detail, no fluff. The scandal of Prince Harry's alleged DNA revelation placed King Charles in the most precarious position of his reign. Having waited decades to ascend the throne, he now found himself under siege not from political rivals or constitutional crises, but from the very foundations of his personal life. The monarchy thrives on perception, and for Charles, perception had always been a challenge. He began his reign carrying the burden of public skepticism, his long affair with Camilla having permanently tarnished the image of his marriage to Diana. But this scandal cut deeper. It was not about romance or public approval. It was about legitimacy, about whether he could be trusted as both a father and a king. And as the world turned its gaze toward him, Charles found himself under fire in ways he could never have imagined. The beginning of the crisis for Charles lay in the immediate questions raised by the revelation. Did he know the truth all along? Had he lived his life as a king in waiting while concealing the secret that Harry was not his biological son? Or was he blindsided, a victim of betrayal like everyone else? The distinction mattered, for it determined whether he would be seen as a liar or a fool. If he had known and hidden it, he would be accused of deceiving the nation, of raising a child under false pretenses while maintaining the illusion of continuity. If he had not known, he would appear weak, blind, and incompetent, a man who failed to see the truth within his own family. Either way, his authority was diminished, and the press seized on the ambiguity with relentless intensity. The middle of the storm was marked by relentless criticism from both public and press. Newspapers ran editorials demanding clarity, arguing that the king owed the nation an explanation. Broadcasters analyzed every word of his rare public appearances, searching for signs of guilt, anger, or denial. Social media amplified the criticism, with hashtags questioning his fitness to rule and memes portraying him as oblivious or duplicitous. For many, the revelation revived old wounds. Diana's supporters argued that the truth proved she had been wronged not only in life, but in legacy. Charles, once criticized for his treatment of her during their marriage, now faced accusations that he had failed her memory by failing their son. The scandal resurrected the specter of Diana, and in doing so, cast Charles in the role of villain once again. Within the palace, Charles reportedly reacted with fury and despair. Those close to him described a man torn between outrage at the leak and devastation over the implications. His relationship with Harry had already been strained, but this revelation threatened to sever it completely. Was Harry still his son in any meaningful sense? Bloodlines defined the monarchy, but Charles had raised Harry, guided him, and represented himself as his father. The emotional complexity was overwhelming. Yet Charles could not afford to dwell on emotions. He was king, and his reign was under attack. Advisors urged him to project strength, to remain silent on private matters, and to focus on public duties. But silence only fueled speculation, and Charles found himself trapped between the need to protect the monarchy and the desire to protect his personal reputation. The crisis also reignited debates about succession. Though William's position was secure, the revelation cast a shadow over the monarchy's stability. If Charles could not be trusted in his role as a father, could he be trusted in his role as a king? Critics argued that the monarchy was already weakened by his reign, and that the DNA scandal was proof that it was time for William to assume the throne sooner rather than later. Petitions circulated online calling for Charles to step aside. Though such moves had no legal weight, they carried symbolic power, reinforcing the perception that Charles was unfit to rule. The pressure mounted, and every day of silence deepened the sense of crisis. The emotional toll on Charles cannot be ignored. For decades, he had fought to rehabilitate his image after the scandals of his youth. His marriage to Camilla, though controversial at first, had gradually gained public acceptance. He had positioned himself as a steady, environmentally conscious monarch for the modern age. Yet now, in the twilight of his life, he faced a scandal that cut deeper than any before. It was not about policy or politics, but about family, identity, and truth. The revelation threatened to undo everything he had worked for, reducing his reign to a footnote in the larger drama of Diana's legacy and Harry's identity. For Charles, the firestorm was both public and deeply personal, a reminder that even as king, he could not escape the shadows of his past. The end of this chapter reveals the precariousness of Charles's position. He was under fire not just from critics, but from history itself. The monarchy had always survived on myth, on the illusion of divine continuity. The DNA revelation shattered that illusion, and Charles was left exposed, his reign weakened at its core. He could not undo the revelation, nor could he silence the speculation. All he could do was endure, projecting dignity while privately grappling with the collapse of trust. For the monarchy, his survival depended on his ability to weather the storm without further damage. For Charles, it was a test of resilience, a trial that would define how history remembered him. King, father, liar, or fool, the world had yet to decide. Diana's legacy revisited, ensuring it reaches at least 2,000 words with a strong beginning, middle, and end, full of gripping detail, no fluff. Diana, Princess of Wales, has always been more than a figure of royal history. To many, she remains a symbol of compassion, rebellion, vulnerability, and truth. Her life and death transformed her into an icon who transcended monarchy, and her legacy continues to cast a long shadow over her sons and the institution she once fought against. With the revelation that King Charles may not be Harry's biological father, Diana's legacy has been thrust back into the spotlight, forcing the world to reconsider her story in a new and devastating light. Was Diana a woman burdened by secrets too dangerous to reveal? Did she carry knowledge of Harry's true parentage? And if so, why did she never speak it aloud? Or was she herself the victim of rumors, her memory now weaponized to explain a truth she may never have intended? Revisiting Diana's legacy in this context reveals how her life, her choices, and her struggles remain central to understanding the crisis engulfing the monarchy. The beginning of this legacy is rooted in Diana's marriage to Charles, a union presented as a fairy tale but lived as a tragedy. From the start, Diana's candidness about her suffering challenged the monarchy's culture of silence. She admitted publicly to her struggles with bulimia, depression, and feelings of entrapment within the royal system. She spoke openly about her loneliness, about her need for love and affection in a marriage that lacked both. Her Panorama interview in 1995 remains one of the most explosive moments in royal history, in which she declared that there were 3 of us in this marriage: referring to Charles's relationship with Camilla. But in the same interview, she also admitted to her own infidelities, including her relationship with James Hewitt. That admission set the stage for decades of speculation about Harry's paternity, and it tethered Diana's legacy to whispers of scandal even as it cemented her reputation for honesty. The middle of her legacy in this context is defined by contradiction. On one hand, Diana's openness won her global admiration. She was seen as a victim of the monarchy's coldness, a woman whose humanity clashed with an institution built on duty and distance. On the other hand, her candid admissions provided ammunition for those who sought to undermine her, framing her as reckless and unstable. The DNA revelation has reopened these contradictions. If Diana knew that Charles was not Harry's father, then her silence becomes a mystery. Did she withhold the truth to protect her son, to protect the monarchy, or to protect herself? If she did not know, then the tragedy is even greater. She has been dragged into a scandal she cannot defend herself against, her memory distorted by forces beyond her control. Either way, her legacy is inseparable from the debate, for the story of Harry's identity is also the story of Diana's choices. Public reaction to Diana's legacy in light of the DNA revelation has been emotional and intense. For her supporters, the revelation reinforces the narrative of a woman trapped in an impossible situation. They argue that if Harry is not Charles's son, it proves that Diana was forced to seek love and comfort outside her marriage, not out of selfishness, but out of desperation. They see her as a woman punished in life and in death for refusing to conform, her truth silenced by an institution that could not tolerate honesty. For her critics, however, the revelation complicates her image. If she knowingly brought a child into the monarchy whose parentage was in doubt, they argue, she endangered the stability of the crown and betrayed her vows. These opposing interpretations ensure that Diana remains as polarizing in death as she was in life. The press has also revisited Diana's story with renewed intensity. Archival footage of her interviews has resurfaced, clips replayed alongside speculation about what she knew and when. Photographs of Diana with Hewitt have been reprinted, their significance re-examined in light of the DNA revelation. Old quotes are being dissected, with journalists searching for hidden meanings that might confirm or deny the suspicions. The recycling of Diana's story serves as a reminder of her enduring power as a figure of fascination. Even decades after her death, her life continues to dominate headlines, her legacy repurposed to explain the present crisis. For Harry, this is both comforting and painful. His mother remains his greatest source of inspiration, but she is also being used once again by the media as a weapon in a war he did not choose. The emotional impact of revisiting Diana's legacy on Harry cannot be overstated. Throughout his life, he has spoken of her with reverence, describing her as the one person who truly understood him. Her death left a void he has never been able to fill, and much of his rebellion against the monarchy has been framed as honoring her spirit. Now, the DNA revelation threatens to complicate that relationship. If she knew the truth, did she betray him by never telling him? If she did not know, how could she have been so unaware of something so fundamental? Either answer leaves Harry with new questions about his mother, questions he cannot ask and that no one can answer. His collapse, in part, was a collapse of his connection to her, for the revelation cast doubt on the certainty of their bond. He remains her son, but the meaning of that bond has been altered forever. The end of Diana's legacy in this chapter of the story is defined by endurance. Whatever the truth of Harry's parentage, Diana's place in history is secure. She remains the people's princess, a woman who captured hearts not because she was perfect, but because she was human. The DNA revelation has not destroyed her legacy. If anything, it has reinforced it. She is once again at the center of global attention, her struggles revisited, her humanity remembered. The monarchy, by contrast, appears diminished, its carefully cultivated image weakened by the reemergence of truths it sought to bury. Diana's legacy endures because it is rooted not in perfection, but in authenticity. And in a world where truth is more powerful than myth, her story continues to resonate more strongly than the monarchy's silence. Revisiting Diana's legacy in the context of the DNA scandal reveals the lasting power of her life and death. She remains the lens through which Harry is understood, the ghost haunting Charles's reign, the figure against whom Meghan is constantly compared, and the mother whose choices continue to shape the fate of the monarchy. Her legacy is not diminished by scandal, it is magnified by it. The DNA revelation is just the latest chapter in a story that began long before Harry's birth and will continue long after. Diana's life was a struggle for truth, and even in death, she forces the monarchy to confront truths it cannot control. The media machine and conspiracies, ensuring it reaches at least 2,000 words, with a clear beginning, middle, and end, detailed and gripping, without fluff. The media has always fed on scandal, and few institutions provide more fodder than the British monarchy. For decades, the press has thrived on the lives of royals, selling headlines that mix fact with rumor, truth with speculation. The revelation that Prince Harry may not be King Charles's biological son was the kind of story journalists dream of, dramatic, emotional, and explosive enough to dominate headlines across the globe. But once unleashed, the story took on a life of its own, amplified by tabloids, online platforms, and conspiracy theorists eager to connect dots, invent narratives, and keep the firestorm alive. What began as a leak of alleged DNA results quickly transformed into a feeding frenzy of media spin and conspiracy theories. The beginning of this media machine reaction lay in the tabloid press. Within hours of the revelation, British newspapers splashed sensational headlines across their front pages. The Sun, the Daily Mail, and other outlets ran side-by-side comparisons of Harry and James Hewitt, reigniting decades-old claims of resemblance. Television programs brought in body language experts and royal insiders to speculate on what the DNA results meant for Harry, for Charles, and for the monarchy. The tone was relentless, and nuance was abandoned in favor of the most sensational interpretations. The idea that a prince's very identity could be a lie was too irresistible to downplay. The press, already adept. Meghan's role in this moment was significant. For years, she had been Harry's partner in rebellion, the one person he felt truly understood the pain of living under the monarchy's control. In this moment of collapse, she was by his side, but even her support could not shield him from the fallout. Observers noted her attempts to steady him, to calm him, but the shock was too great. Meghan herself likely understood the far-reaching implications of the revelation. Not only had her husband's world been shattered, but her children's place in the royal narrative was now in question. Archie and Lilibet, already marginalized within the royal family, now faced a future clouded by uncertainty about their bloodline. The collapse of Harry was, in truth, the collapse of their entire family's sense of belonging to the monarchy. The ripple effects spread quickly. William, Harry's brother, was reportedly torn between concern for his sibling and the reinforcement of a hierarchy he had always known. For William, the revelation confirmed his role as the true heir, the legitimate continuation of the Windsor bloodline. But it also meant watching his brother crumble under the weight of truth. Their relationship, already fractured by years of disagreements and public feuds, grew even more strained. Sympathy may have been there privately, but publicly William could not afford to align too closely with Harry in this moment. To do so would risk undermining the stability of the succession. And so, Harry's collapse was met with silence from the brother he had once been inseparable from, deepening the wound of isolation. The emotional fallout extended beyond family. The monarchy itself, already battered by scandals and controversies, now faced the specter of illegitimacy. For centuries, the royal family had survived by maintaining the illusion of unbroken lineage. The revelation that Harry was not Charles's son did not directly threaten the succession. William remained secure. But it threatened the institution's credibility. If the monarchy had either lied or been ignorant about something so fundamental, how could the public trust anything it said? Harry's collapse symbolized not just a personal breaking point, but a broader collapse of public confidence in the royal narrative. The emotional fallout was not confined to palace walls. It reverberated across the nation and beyond. For Harry himself, the fallout took the form of an identity crisis. He had always carried the memory of his mother, Diana, as his guiding star. She had been the one who understood him, who shielded him from the worst of the institution's cruelty. Now, even that memory was complicated. If Diana had known the truth, Why had she not told him? If she had not known, then what kind of secret had she been forced to carry unknowingly? The questions about his mother's role in this revelation haunted him. The collapse was not only about losing Charles as a father, but also about losing certainty in Diana as a source of truth. For a man whose life was already defined by grief over her loss, this was a second loss, equally devastating. The end of this section reveals the depth of the fallout. Harry's collapse was the beginning of a new chapter, one in which his relationship with his family, his sense of identity, and his place in the monarchy would never be the same. The emotional fallout ensured that this was not a revelation that could be neatly managed or forgotten. It was a wound that would continue to bleed, reopening every time Harry faced the public, every time he looked at his children, every time he tried to reconcile with his past. The monarchy could attempt to spin the story, but the image of Harry collapsing under the weight of truth was too powerful to erase. It was the moment that transformed speculation into reality, the moment that turned a man into a symbol of shattered identity. In the aftermath, Harry's life would be defined by how he chose to respond to this collapse. Would he retreat further into exile, cutting ties completely with the family that had lied to him? Would he seek revenge through public revelations of his own, exposing the secrets the monarchy had long tried to bury? Or would he attempt to rebuild himself from the ground up, embracing the truth of his biological identity and forging a new path outside the shadow of the crown? These were the questions left hanging in the wake of his collapse, questions that would shape not only his future, but also the future of the institution he once represented. The Palace in Panic, ensuring it reaches at least 2,000 words, structured with a beginning, middle, and end, and written in a gripping, narrative style without fluff. The revelation that Prince Harry was not King Charles's biological son did not remain confined to private whispers. Within hours of the DNA bombshell, the heart of the monarchy, Buckingham Palace, descended into panic. The institution that had weathered abdications, divorces, and death was suddenly faced with a crisis unlike any in its modern history. For centuries, the royal family had relied on a delicate balance of tradition, secrecy, and ceremony to maintain its image of unbroken continuity. That image now teetered on the edge of collapse. The palace, usually so adept at controlling the narrative, found itself scrambling to contain a story that was both too personal and too monumental to suppress. The beginning of the panic unfolded behind closed doors. Senior courtiers, advisors, and private secretaries rushed into emergency meetings as soon as the rumors of the DNA leak spread. Phones rang constantly, emails flew back and forth, and statements were drafted, revised, and rejected. The palace's communications team faced an impossible question. How do you respond to a revelation that challenges the very foundation of royal legitimacy? To deny it outright risked further scrutiny. To confirm it would invite chaos. To remain silent would let speculation grow unchecked. Every option was fraught with danger, and the speed at which the news spread across global media left no time for careful strategy. For the first time in decades, Buckingham Palace looked less like a fortress of control and more like a ship taking on water. The middle of the panic was marked by the clashing of personalities and agendas within the institution. King Charles, the man at the center of the storm, reportedly reacted with fury and despair. He had spent his life waiting to be king, enduring decades in the shadow of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. Now, only a short time into his reign, his credibility was under attack in a way he could not have imagined. Did he know the truth all along? That question lingered in every corridor of the palace. If he had known and concealed it, he would be accused of deception on a national scale. If he had not known, he would appear weak, a man so blind to his own family that he had failed to see the truth staring back at him. Either way, his authority as king was weakened. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla is said to have urged restraint. Having spent much of her life at the center of royal scandal herself, she understood the futility of trying to silence a story once it reached the press. Her focus was on protecting Charles, insulating him from public humiliation, and ensuring that William's position as heir remained unchallenged. Behind her calm exterior, however, there was fear. The monarchy she had worked so hard to be accepted into was again on the brink of public scorn. She knew what it was like to be vilified by the press, and she recognized the ferocity with which this story would be pursued. The panic was not just about Harry. It was about survival. Prince William's role in the palace panic was equally complicated. On one hand, the revelation strengthened his position. There was no longer any doubt that he was the legitimate heir, the unbroken continuation of the Windsor bloodline. On the other hand, the sight of his brother collapsing under the weight of truth brought little comfort. The monarchy depended on the image of unity, and Harry's suffering threatened to expose fractures too wide to ignore. Advisors counseled William to stay silent, to project calm and stability, but inside the palace walls he reportedly expressed anger at the way the situation was handled. He knew that his own reputation would also be tested by association. The panic was not limited to Charles. It engulfed the entire family. The courtiers, often referred to as the men in gray suits, became the unseen generals of this battle. Their task was to manage the crisis while keeping the monarch's dignity intact. They considered every angle: how to brief the press, how to coordinate with international outlets, how to prevent leaks from within the palace itself. The fear was not only about what had already been revealed, but about what might come next. Would more documents surface? Would new names be dragged into the story? Would Harry himself speak publicly? And if so, what would he say? The courtiers could contain many things, but they could not contain a man who had already shown a willingness to defy the institution at every turn. The middle of the panic also played out in the corridors of government. While the monarchy is largely ceremonial, its stability is tied to Britain's national identity. Prime ministers, foreign leaders, and Commonwealth officials watched closely, wary of how the scandal might impact the monarchy's standing worldwide. If Harry was not Charles's son, what did that mean for his role within the Commonwealth, for his titles, for his children's recognition? The monarchy's crisis quickly became a diplomatic concern. Behind the scenes, government officials pressed the palace for clarity, urging them to provide reassurance before the story spiraled further out of control. But reassurance was difficult to give when the truth itself remained murky. The end of the palace panic paints a picture of desperation. Draft statements were prepared but never released, speeches considered but abandoned. The monarchy's strategy devolved into silence, hoping the storm would pass. But silence in the modern age is rarely effective. Every refusal to comment was interpreted as confirmation, every hesitation as guilt. Journalists camped outside Buckingham Palace. Commentators dissected every photograph of the royals, and social media amplified the scandal with a ferocity that no institution could control. The palace, once the master of narrative, found itself cornered, unable to control a story that was both too intimate and too explosive to suppress. For the monarchy, the panic revealed a larger truth. It is no longer able to manage scandal as it once did. In the past, whispers of affairs or illegitimacy could be buried through censorship and carefully cultivated relationships with the press. But in the digital age, where information leaks globally within seconds, secrecy is no longer an effective shield. The DNA revelation was not just a personal crisis for Harry. It was a test of the monarchy's ability to survive in a world where truth can no longer be contained. And in that test, the palace showed cracks that may never fully heal. The panic was more than just reaction, it was foreshadowing. It foreshadowed the battles to come, the growing tension between Harry and the institution, the global fascination with the truth of his identity, and the unraveling of a monarchy that has long depended on myth. The palace could scramble, deny, and remain silent, but the panic itself was proof of vulnerability. The DNA revelation had struck not just at Harry's heart, but at the heart of the monarchy itself. Global reactions and social media firestorm, ensuring it reaches at least 2,000 words, with a clear beginning, middle, and end, no fluff, fully detailed. The news of Prince Harry's alleged DNA revelation did not remain contained within palace walls or British borders. In today's world, where information moves faster than governments, faster than institutions, and faster than truth itself, the story erupted across the globe with astonishing speed. What once might have taken days to spread across newspapers now became an instant digital firestorm, fueled by social media, online tabloids, international broadcasters, and millions of ordinary people who felt invested in the story of a prince discovering that his father might not be who he thought. The global reaction was not just about curiosity. It was about identity, betrayal, and the crumbling of a myth that had stood for centuries. The beginning of this reaction unfolded within minutes of the leak. Social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram became ground zero for the firestorm. Hashtags such as #HarryDNA, #RoyalScandal, and #NotCharles'Son trended worldwide. Sometimes within the same hour the news broke. Users from London to Los Angeles to Lagos weighed in, posting theories, memes, and heated debates. Some expressed sympathy for Harry, describing his collapse as a heartbreaking human moment. Others treated it as entertainment, the latest plot twist in what many see as the never-ending soap opera of the British monarchy. Memes comparing Harry to James Hewitt surged, as did side-by-side photographs that people insisted proved the truth of the revelation. The speed with which these images circulated ensured that the story was no longer about one man or one institution. It became a global spectacle. The middle of the reaction was defined by polarization. On one side were those who saw Harry as a victim. They argued that he had been betrayed not only by his father, but by an entire institution that had failed to protect him from decades of cruel speculation. Sympathy poured in, with messages of support trending alongside the harsher commentary. Mental health advocates spoke publicly about the devastating impact such a revelation could have on a person's well-being, drawing attention to Harry's previous openness about therapy and emotional struggles. For them, the collapse was a symbol of the unbearable pressure of living under constant scrutiny and the brutality of truth when it finally surfaces. On the other side were those who mocked, jeered, and celebrated the scandal. For critics of Harry and Meghan, the DNA story became ammunition. They claimed it explained Harry's rebellion, his departure from the royal family, and his criticisms of the monarchy. To them, this was not tragedy but irony, proof that Harry had never truly belonged. Conspiracy theories flourished in this climate, with some insisting that the revelation was orchestrated by Meghan to humiliate the royal family, while others suggested it was leaked from within the palace as a deliberate act of sabotage. In this swirl of speculation, facts mattered less than narratives, and social media amplified whichever version captured attention. The firestorm was not limited to ordinary users. Celebrities, commentators, and politicians joined the chorus, each adding their voice to the narrative. Some spoke with seriousness, expressing sorrow for Harry's plight and urging compassion. Others leaned into the entertainment value, joking about royal DNA tests as if it were reality television. Influencers used the moment to gain visibility, producing endless content analyzing photographs, timelines, and body language. Late-night talk show hosts turned the scandal into punchlines, weaving Harry's collapse into comedic monologues broadcast across millions of screens. The DNA revelation had crossed from news into culture, embedding itself in conversations that stretched far beyond Britain. News outlets across the world competed for dominance in covering the story. In the United States, networks that had long followed Harry and Meghan's journey after their move to California treated the DNA revelation as a major headline. Talk shows and daytime panels dissected every angle, framing it not just as a royal scandal, but as a human drama about identity and betrayal. In Europe, where monarchies still hold symbolic weight, the story became a mirror for broader debates about the relevance of royalty in the modern age. In countries across the Commonwealth, citizens questioned what this meant for their own relationship with the British crown. The scandal did not exist in isolation. It tapped into centuries of colonial history, privilege, and global fascination with the royal family. The middle of the global reaction was also marked by outrage. Many asked how such sensitive information could be leaked in the first place. Privacy advocates condemned the exposure, arguing that whatever the truth of Harry's parentage, he deserved the dignity of processing it in private. Others countered that as a public figure whose life is tied to an institution funded by taxpayers, such revelations were inevitable. The clash between privacy and public interest became a central theme of the firestorm, with no clear resolution. What was clear, however, was that once the story was out, there was no putting it back. The DNA revelation was not something that could be forgotten. It was too sensational, too human, too consequential. The end of this section reveals the depth of the firestorm's impact. What began as a leak had grown into a global conversation that touched on themes far larger than Harry himself. The story became about trust. Trust in family, trust in institutions, trust in the stories people are told about their own origins. It became about the cruelty of rumor, the hunger of the media, and the way technology magnifies both truth and lies. It became about the fragility of monarchy in a digital age where myths can collapse in real time. For Harry, the global reaction only intensified the emotional fallout. His collapse was replayed endlessly, analyzed, and dissected. His pain became spectacle, his humanity transformed into content for millions to consume. The firestorm ultimately left the world with more questions than answers. Who leaked the DNA test? Was the report authentic or manipulated? Did Charles know? And if so, why had he remained silent? And perhaps most importantly, how would Harry recover, not just as a public figure, but as a man who had seen the story of his life rewritten in front of the entire world? The global reaction was proof that the monarchy no longer belonged solely to Britain. It belonged to everyone who had an internet connection, everyone who could watch, judge, and participate in the spectacle. In that sense, Harry's collapse was not just a personal tragedy or a family scandal. It was a global event, and one that will be remembered as a defining moment in the history of the modern monarchy. Meghan Markle's position, ensuring it reaches at least 2,000 words with a clear beginning, middle, and end, written in a gripping narrative style, without fluff. Meghan Markle's role in the unfolding scandal cannot be understated. From the moment she entered Harry's life, she became both his refuge and the lightning rod for much of the public's anger toward him. Her presence divided opinion, with some praising her as a strong woman who supported Harry's independence, and others condemning her as the instigator of his rebellion against the monarchy. In the wake of the DNA revelation, Meghan's position became even more complex. Was she the unwavering partner standing beside her husband in his darkest hour, or was she, as critics claimed, a calculating strategist who used the revelation to weaken the royal family further? The truth, as always with Meghan, lies somewhere between perception and reality. It is within this turbulent middle that James Hewitt enters most forcefully. A handsome cavalry officer, Hewitt was introduced to Diana in the mid-1980s when she sought riding lessons. What began as instruction quickly deepened into companionship, and companionship evolved into intimacy. Hewitt himself later admitted to a 5-year relationship with Diana, though he insisted it began after Prince Harry's birth. The timeline, however, has always been contested. Skeptics have pointed to the physical similarities between Harry and Hewitt. Both share striking red hair, a similar jawline, and a certain rugged charm. The resemblance was too convenient, too tantalizing for a scandal-hungry press to ignore. Tabloids splashed side-by-side comparisons of Harry and Hewitt across front pages, fanning the flames of rumor that Charles was not Harry's real father. Even when confronted with denials, the public imagination clung to the possibility because it aligned so neatly with the tragic narrative of Diana's unhappy marriage. Yet the whispers were never only about Hewitt. The truth is that Diana's openness about her struggles, her candid interviews, and her willingness to admit to affairs made her uniquely vulnerable to speculation. In her explosive Panorama interview with Martin Bashir in 1995, Diana confessed, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded," referring to Charles and Camilla. But she also admitted to seeking comfort in others, including Hewitt. This rare honesty, intended perhaps to free herself from the burden of secrecy, had the opposite effect. It gave tabloids license to invent, exaggerate, and repeat every rumor about her love life. Suddenly, every man who so much as smiled at Diana could be framed as a potential lover. And every rumor about lovers circled back to one haunting question. What did this mean for her sons? The end of this section draws the threads together. Diana's love life was not just her own. It became a prism through which the monarchy's fragility was exposed. Her affairs, whether real or imagined, symbolized resistance against a system that demanded obedience. They also served as ammunition for those who sought to undermine her, and later, her children. The rumors about Harry's paternity are not simply about biology. They are the culmination of decades of scrutiny, of a woman punished for her humanity, and of a system desperate to preserve its image of continuity. The whispers of affairs gave birth to the whispers of illegitimacy. And those whispers, once planted, never died. They grew, fed by photographs, by speculation, by public doubt, until they became almost inseparable from Harry's identity in the public eye. In truth, Diana's affairs tell us less about her son's bloodlines than about the pain of her life. They reveal a woman who longed for love but was trapped in a loveless institution, who sought solace in those willing to offer her tenderness, who fought back against isolation with the only weapon she had, her humanity, her vulnerability, and her refusal to be silenced. But the price of that resistance was steep. The affairs became the lens through which her children were judged, the whispers became the backdrop to Harry's life, and now, with alleged DNA revelations, they have returned to the forefront in the most brutal way imaginable. James Hewitt connection, ensuring it reaches at least 2,000 words, with a gripping beginning, middle, and end, staying factual yet dramatic, no fluff. The name James Hewitt has lingered in the shadows of royal history for decades, almost inseparable from the narrative of Prince Harry's life. To understand why, one must look closely at who he was, how he entered Diana's life, and why his presence has become the cornerstone of whispers surrounding Harry's bloodline. Hewitt was not a royal, not a politician, not a man with influence or aristocratic heritage. He was, in many ways, an ordinary man who happened to cross paths with the most famous woman in the world at a time when she was desperate for companionship. And in that crossing of paths, a love story, or perhaps simply an affair, was born that would ripple through history with consequences no one could have predicted. The beginning of their connection was innocuous. It was the mid-1980s, and Diana, already feeling abandoned within her marriage to Prince Charles, sought out horseback riding lessons. It was through this pursuit that she was introduced to Captain James Hewitt, a cavalry officer whose life was steeped in military discipline and equestrian skill. Hewitt was charming, attentive, and unlike the courtiers and aristocrats Diana was accustomed to. He was a soldier, a man who understood duty, but who also carried himself with an approachable warmth. For a young princess battling loneliness and depression inside gilded cages, Hewitt represented a breath of fresh air. Their connection was immediate, and what began as lessons soon developed into something deeper. The middle of their relationship is where history and speculation begin to tangle. According to Hewitt, their romance blossomed into a full-fledged affair that lasted for 5 years. He later admitted as much in interviews and in his controversial book, in which he detailed aspects of his time with Diana that many saw as exploitative. Critics accused him of cashing in on her memory, while supporters argued he was merely telling his truth. What cannot be denied is that Diana herself confirmed the affair in her famous Panorama interview in 1995, lending his claims undeniable weight. She described how Hewitt had been a source of comfort during some of her darkest years, a man who offered her the kind of affection she had been denied in her marriage. In those moments, she was not a princess, not an icon, but a woman longing for love. The speculation surrounding Harry enters here, and it is relentless. Observers could not help but notice the physical resemblance between Hewitt and the young prince. Both possessed bright auburn hair, a strong jawline, and similar facial features. Tabloids seized upon this resemblance, plastering side-by-side photographs across front pages with captions that all but declared Hewitt to be Harry's real father. For years, Hewitt denied the claim, insisting that his relationship with Diana began after Harry was born in 1984. He maintained that the timeline made paternity impossible. Still, the resemblance was too striking and the narrative too compelling for the public to let go of. In an era when photographs told stories louder than words, those comparisons became evidence in the court of public opinion, even if biology told another tale. Beyond resemblance, the affair carried symbolic weight. Diana's connection to Hewitt was seen by many as a rebellion against Charles, a counterbalance to his ongoing relationship with Camilla. Just as Charles clung to Camilla, Diana clung to Hewitt, as if both were seeking outside the marriage what they could never find within it. To the monarchy, this was dangerous territory. The sanctity of royal bloodlines depended on silence, on secrets remaining buried. For Diana to openly admit to affairs, and for one of those affairs to involve a man whose features mirrored her son's, was an earthquake for the institution. It gave rise to doubts not just about Diana's fidelity, but about the legitimacy of succession itself. Even if those doubts were unfounded, they planted seeds that have grown unchecked for decades. The end of their relationship was as dramatic as its beginning was quiet. As the affair became public knowledge, Hewitt faced intense scrutiny. He was vilified in the press, mocked, and portrayed as a man who had betrayed Diana by speaking too openly about their intimacy. His decision to collaborate on a book about their time together was widely condemned, seen as a betrayal of trust. Diana, meanwhile, moved on emotionally, distancing herself from Hewitt and forming other relationships. Yet the stain of their connection lingered, not because of what it meant for her, but because of what it implied for Harry. Even after Diana's death, the whispers persisted, with Hewitt's name forever tied to the young prince's identity. In the years that followed, Hewitt himself seemed haunted by the speculation. He gave interviews where he expressed regret for the pain caused, and at times, he appeared almost crushed by the weight of his association with Diana and Harry. He even admitted that the constant rumor of being Harry's father had damaged his life, making him a target of ridicule. Yet, despite his denials, the story never fully disappeared. It was too tantalizing, too neatly aligned with the public's fascination with scandal. Even when evidence suggested otherwise, the myth endured, because myths are often more powerful than facts. This section ends by highlighting why the Hewitt connection remains so central to the larger narrative. He was not the only man Diana was linked to, nor was he the only figure in her complicated romantic history. But he was the one whose features echoed in Harry, whose relationship with Diana overlapped with Harry's formative years, and whose name became shorthand for the possibility that Harry was not Charles's son. Whether true or not, the Hewitt connection has become a permanent fixture in the story of Harry's identity, resurfacing again and again whenever questions about his bloodline arise. And now, with alleged DNA revelations casting doubt on Charles's paternity, that connection is once more at the center of global attention, a ghost from Diana's past returning to shake the foundations of the monarchy. The DNA bombshell report, ensuring it reaches at least 2,000 words with a gripping beginning, middle, and end, no fluff, and maintaining the storytelling flow. The rumors had lived in the shadows for decades, but it was the emergence of the DNA bombshell that tore them into the light. For years, the palace relied on the power of silence, the strategy of ignoring speculation until it burned itself out. But science has a way of cutting through rumor, and in this story, the alleged results of a DNA test were the blade. When word spread that conclusive evidence now existed. Proof that King Charles was not Prince Harry's biological father, the old whispers transformed into something far more dangerous, fact, or at least the appearance of fact. And in an age when truth and perception often intertwine, that appearance was enough to send shockwaves across the monarchy. The beginning of this revelation starts with a single question: who wanted the test done, and why now? DNA testing is not something the monarchy would ever willingly commission without cause. The very act of questioning bloodlines is seen as treasonous to the crown's continuity, for the monarchy survives on the illusion of unbroken lineage. Yet sources suggest the test may not have originated inside the palace at all. Some claim it was Harry himself who sought answers, driven by a lifelong awareness of the rumors and a desire to put them to rest once and for all. Others suggest Meghan may have played a role, either to provide clarity for her husband or as part of her ongoing struggles against the royal institution. Still others speculate the leak came from an insider, perhaps a disgruntled staffer, or even someone close to William, who would stand to gain from Harry's humiliation. The origin of the test is shrouded in mystery, and that mystery itself has become fuel for endless speculation. The middle of this section is where the drama intensifies. The supposed results left no ambiguity. Charles, the man who had raised Harry, who had walked with him through public ceremonies and family milestones, was not his biological father. The phrasing used in the leaked documents was reportedly cold, clinical, the kind of detached language common in science, but devastating in human impact. For Harry, the confirmation was not just data on a page. It was the unraveling of a life narrative. Every childhood moment, every look from his father, every attempt to reconcile with Charles now seemed tainted by the knowledge that they did not share the same blood. His rebellion against the monarchy, his decision to leave Britain, his strained relationship with William, all of it now looked different when seen through the lens of this revelation. Was he rebelling against Charles? Or was he rebelling against the truth his heart may have always suspected? The immediate reaction, as described by sources, was collapse. Harry is said to have physically broken down upon hearing the news, his body giving way to the weight of knowledge too heavy to carry. Those close to him describe a man who felt betrayed not just by his father, but by the entire institution that had raised him. If Charles had known all along, why had he not told him? If Charles had not known, how could the palace have allowed such a test to surface without protection? The collapse was not merely about fainting or exhaustion. It was about the shattering of trust, the breaking of identity. In that moment, Harry was not a prince, not a public figure, but a man whose life had been built on a lie. The palace's reaction, meanwhile, was swift but measured. There was no official confirmation, no acknowledgement of the test. Spokespeople dismissed the reports as fabrications, insisting the rumors had been disproven long ago. But their silence on the specifics only added to the fire. If the test were false, why not produce evidence to refute it? If the story was baseless, why not allow Harry himself to speak publicly and deny it? Instead, there was only carefully crafted language, the kind of phrasing that seeks to calm without clarifying. And in the absence of clarity, the public imagination filled in the gaps. The bombshell had been dropped, and no amount of palace spin could make it disappear. The global reaction was immediate. News outlets from London to New York to Sydney plastered headlines about the DNA scandal. Social media platforms lit up with debates, jokes, and heartfelt commentary. Memes circulated comparing photos of Harry with Hewitt, while others mocked Charles for his supposed blindness. Yet beneath the humor was a serious undercurrent. This was not just gossip, it was a direct challenge to the legitimacy of the royal family. If one of the king's sons was not his son at all, what did that mean for the monarchy's stability? Would this revelation delegitimize Harry's role as a prince? Would it affect his children, Archie and Lilibet, who already lived on the margins of royal life? The questions multiplied faster than answers could be given. For Harry, the personal impact outweighed the public frenzy. The bombshell cut deep into his sense of belonging. From childhood, he had always felt different, always perceived himself as the spare rather than the heir, always struggling to find his place beside William. The DNA results turned that feeling into a devastating reality. He was different, not just in temperament, but in blood, and that difference explained, in his mind, why he had always been treated as lesser, why the institution had always seemed reluctant to embrace him fully. Whether or not that perception was true, the revelation crystallized it, making his estrangement from the family feel inevitable rather than chosen. The end of this section is not closure, but escalation. The DNA bombshell is not a conclusion. It is the spark that ignites everything that follows. It raises more questions than it answers. Did Charles know the truth and hide it? Did Diana confide in anyone before her death? Is Hewitt truly the father, or is another man, perhaps long forgotten, the real biological parent? The ambiguity is as damaging as the revelation itself, for it keeps the story alive in the press, in the public imagination, and in Harry's own heart. The monarchy, faced with one of the greatest crises of its modern history, can only hope to contain the flames. But containment may no longer be possible, because once truth is weaponized, it cannot be buried again. The DNA bombshell report is, in many ways, the pivot point of the entire story. It transforms whispers into headlines, speculation into something resembling certainty. It changes Harry's identity from the inside out, and it places the monarchy on a collision course with public doubt that no amount of tradition or ceremony may be able to withstand. For Harry, it is the moment that broke him. For the monarchy, it is the moment that may define its future. Prince Harry's collapse and emotional fallout, making it at least 2,000 words, with a compelling beginning, middle, and end, detailed but without fluff. The image of Prince Harry collapsing upon learning the DNA results is both literal and symbolic. In that single moment, decades of suspicion, gossip, and whispered rumors transformed into an unbearable truth. For a man who has lived his entire life under a microscope, surrounded by headlines that questioned his every move, The confirmation of what he had perhaps always feared was too much to bear. His body gave out under the weight of knowledge. But behind the collapse was a deeper unraveling, an emotional fallout that touched not only Harry himself, but also those closest to him, and by extension, the institution of the monarchy. The beginning of this collapse lies in Harry's unique psychological journey. From childhood, he was cast in the role of the spare, the second son whose existence supported the heir, Prince William, but whose destiny was always uncertain. The monarchy made little effort to hide this hierarchy. William was prepared for kingship, groomed to be the perfect heir, while Harry was allowed more freedom but also less direction. That freedom came with an undercurrent of neglect, of being viewed as less essential. As he grew older, that feeling of being second best became entangled with the constant rumor that he might not be Charles's true son. He laughed it off in public at times, even joked about it with friends, but the whispers were always there, gnawing at the edges of his identity. When the DNA report allegedly confirmed that Charles was not his father, it was not just a scientific result. It was the validation of every insecurity he had carried since childhood. The middle of this fallout was emotional carnage. Witnesses describe Harry as devastated, unable to process the news without breaking down physically. His collapse was not staged, not dramatic for the sake of effect. It was the natural reaction of a man who had just been told that his entire life story was based on a falsehood. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming. If Charles had known, why had he not told him? If the palace had known, why had they allowed him to endure decades of cruel speculation without defending him? And if no one had known, then how could such a revelation emerge now, after so much time, in such a brutal fashion? The questions came in waves, each one cutting deeper than the last. Betrayal, confusion, and grief fused into one unbearable emotion, and his body could no longer hold it. Meghan's role in this moment was significant. For years, she had been Harry's partner in rebellion, the one person he felt truly understood the pain of living under the monarchy's control. In this moment of collapse, she was by his side, but even her support could not shield him from the fallout. Observers noted her attempts to steady him, to calm him, but the shock was too great. Meghan herself likely understood the far-reaching implications of the revelation. Not only had her husband's world been shattered, but her children's place in the royal narrative was now in question. Archie and Lilibet, already marginalized within the royal family, now faced a future clouded by uncertainty about their bloodline. The collapse of Harry was, in truth, what if the very foundation of your identity, the very story the world told about who you are, suddenly collapsed in a single instant? For most people, the thought alone is terrifying. But for Prince Harry, a man whose every move has been dissected, analyzed, and criticized under the relentless glare of cameras and headlines, the shocking possibility of learning that King Charles is not his biological father is nothing short of world-shattering. The British monarchy has endured centuries of scandal, rebellion, and whispers of betrayal, yet nothing could prepare the institution, or the man who has always lived in its shadow, for this kind of revelation. The rumor that Charles may not be Harry's true father has been whispered for decades, buried beneath official denials. But now, according to alleged DNA revelations, it appears the truth has violently broken through the surface. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The story begins with a young boy born into unimaginable privilege, but also into unimaginable pressure. From the very moment Harry entered the world in 1984, speculation about his appearance began. Observers noticed his striking red hair, his facial structure, and his overall lack of resemblance to Charles. The resemblance to another man, however, James Hewitt, the cavalry officer with whom Princess Diana was rumored to have had an affair, was enough to ignite decades of gossip. For years, palace spokespeople dismissed these theories as cruel fabrications, pointing out that Diana's affair with Hewitt began after Harry's birth. Still, whispers persisted, fueled by tabloid headlines, drunken pub conversations, and the ceaseless appetite of the public for royal intrigue. But what happens when those whispers are no longer confined to rumor? What happens when science enters the picture, delivering results that can no longer be ignored? The report of a DNA test, allegedly confirming that King Charles is not Harry's biological father, represents not only a personal earthquake for Harry, but a political and cultural crisis for the monarchy. A monarchy whose power rests not merely on ceremony and tradition, but on the fragile continuity of bloodlines. For Harry, this revelation is not just about science or politics. It is about identity, loyalty, and the crumbling of the last illusions he may have held about his place in the House of Windsor. In the hours after the supposed DNA confirmation, sources claim that Harry collapsed upon hearing the results. Collapse is not merely a physical act in this context. It is symbolic. For a man who has lived much of his adult life trying to escape the suffocating expectations of royal life, yet simultaneously carrying the burden of representing it, this revelation is nothing short of devastating. Imagine being told that the very man you've spent your life simultaneously rebelling against and seeking approval from is, in fact, not even your biological parent. Imagine realizing that all the sacrifices, the criticisms, the family rifts, and the deep inner conflicts were built upon a foundation that was never yours to begin with. The collapse is not just of body but of spirit. This story matters not because it is salacious, though it certainly is that, but because it touches on universal human questions. Who are we really? How much of who we are is defined by blood versus choice? What does family mean when the ties that bind are revealed to be fragile or even false? For Harry, whose life has been the subject of constant judgment and often brutal scrutiny, the revelation cuts to the heart of these questions. It is not just the monarchy under the microscope now. It is the very definition of identity and truth in an age of secrets and betrayals. To fully understand the magnitude of what has unfolded, one has to look back at the fractured history of the modern monarchy. Diana's marriage to Charles was never the fairy tale the world wanted it to be. It was a relationship marred by infidelity, disillusionment, and emotional distance. Charles's ongoing relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, long before she became queen consort, was an open wound in the marriage. For Diana, isolated and trapped, other relationships provided not only comfort, but also escape. Among those, her connection with James Hewitt has been endlessly dissected. Did their relationship begin after Harry's birth, as Hewitt himself has claimed? Or were there secret encounters before, hidden beneath the layers of royal secrecy? It is in this ambiguity that decades of speculation have flourished. The middle of this unfolding drama centers on how the monarchy has always managed scandal. From abdications to affairs, the royal family has survived because it controls the narrative, silencing critics when necessary, and leaning on the machinery of the press when it suits their interests. But DNA is harder to silence. Facts of biology, if revealed, cannot be as easily managed by palace press officers. And in an age where information leaks travel globally within seconds, there is no safe harbor for secrets of this magnitude. The supposed revelation that Charles is not Harry's father threatens to undo years of carefully curated image management. It also raises questions of timing. Why now? Who ordered such a test, and who leaked it? Was it Harry himself, desperate for answers? Was it Meghan, maneuvering strategically within a fractured relationship with the institution? Was it someone within the monarchy, pulling strings for reasons of succession and power? Each of these possibilities carries weight and consequence. If it was Harry, the story becomes one of a man finally taking agency in uncovering his truth, no matter how painful. If it was Meghan, critics will say it is part of a larger battle she has waged with the monarchy. And if it was someone within the institution itself, the question becomes whether the monarchy is cannibalizing itself from within, sacrificing Harry to protect the crown. As we reach the close of this introduction, the picture is clear. This is not just another royal rumor. This is not another tabloid fantasy concocted to sell papers. This is a story about a man facing the destruction of everything he thought he knew about himself, and about an institution fighting to maintain its relevance and stability in the face of truths it cannot control. The collapse of Harry is not just about his physical reaction. It is about the collapse of illusions, the collapse of public trust, and perhaps even the collapse of the monarchy's carefully polished image of continuity. And so, the question lingers. If Charles is not Harry's father, who is? What does this mean for Harry's place in the world, for his relationship with his brother William, for the monarchy itself? More importantly, What does it mean for Harry's sense of self? As we move forward into the deeper sections of this story, we will explore the origins of these rumors, the man at the center of them, and the ways this revelation reverberates through the palace walls and across the globe. But for now, remember this. The truth has a way of rising, no matter how deeply it is buried. And in Harry's case, the truth may have changed everything in a single moment. But beyond the palace walls and the ornate traditions of the monarchy, the heart of this story is deeply human. The sudden collapse of Prince Harry when confronted with the revelation speaks to something raw and universal. It is the moment when identity shatters. Every person has at some point wondered about their origins, about the truths their parents carried, about the hidden stories buried in family history. For Harry, those private fears and questions have always been magnified by the world's gaze. He was never allowed the quiet privacy of doubt. Every aspect of his life has been subject to gossip columns, paparazzi lenses, and international headlines. To learn now, in such a definitive way, that his father is not the man he thought, is a blow that reaches far deeper than any tabloid scandal. It is a reckoning with the self. Consider the symbolism of his collapse. Harry has endured war zones, harsh military training, the loss of his mother at a young age, relentless media attacks, and the suffocating expectations of royal duty. He has stood tall in the face of grief, criticism, and exile. And yet it was this truth, the discovery of who his real father may, or may not, be, that brought him to his knees. It shows how identity is not just about public strength, but about private foundations. Remove those foundations, and even the strongest figure crumbles. This is the fragility of humanity laid bare. The palace can attempt to spin the story, the press can feast on the drama, but the image of Harry collapsing is one that resonates because it is about something everyone understands, the deep fear of losing one's sense of belonging. The middle of this introduction is the pivot point. From here, the narrative stretches outward into the global impact. The monarchy, already fragile after years of public doubt, finds itself cornered. Every monarchy throughout history has depended on the illusion of divine right, the unbroken chain of blood that stretches backward through the centuries. Break that chain, and the illusion falters. For the House of Windsor, continuity is everything. The Queen held the institution together through decades of turmoil, but her passing left Charles vulnerable. Now, if one of his sons is revealed not to be his blood heir, the questions grow louder. What else has the monarchy hidden? What other truths have been buried under ceremony and tradition? The revelation is not just about Harry. It is about the monarchy's credibility at its core. At the same time, the world outside Britain reacts with fascination and judgment. Social media does not wait for palace confirmation. Within minutes of leaks, hashtags trend globally, memes flood timelines, and debates ignite across platforms. For many, Harry's collapse is a symbol of justice, of truth finally surfacing. For others, it is entertainment, another chapter in the long-running soap opera of the British royals. But underneath the jokes and speculation, there is a more serious current: sympathy. Millions see themselves in Harry's pain. Millions have lived with secrets of paternity, with family truths revealed late in life, with the sting of betrayal. In Harry's story, the personal becomes universal. And what of Diana? Though she has been gone for decades, her presence looms over this revelation like a ghost haunting the palace corridors. Every scandal tied to Harry inevitably circles back to her. Her honesty, her vulnerability, and her struggles with both love and duty made her beloved across the globe. Now, the suggestion that her relationship with Hewitt or another man may have resulted in Harry's conception forces the world to reconsider her legacy yet again. Was Diana protecting Harry all along? Did she know the truth? Was she burdened by the weight of secrets too dangerous to reveal in her lifetime? The image of Diana as a tragic, silenced figure gains even more depth in the shadow of this revelation. As the introduction nears its end, the stage is set for a deeper exploration. We know the stakes: Harry's identity, the monarchy's credibility, the public's trust. We know the players: Harry, Charles, William, Meghan, Diana, Hewitt. We know the backdrop: decades of rumor finally clashing with the harsh light of DNA science. And we know the emotional heartbeat: a man broken not by war, not by loss, not by criticism, but by truth. It is this collision of personal tragedy and institutional fragility that makes the story so powerful, so gripping, so impossible to look away from. The end of this introduction must leave the audience with one lingering thought. This is not just a story about royals. It is a story about family, about secrets, and about how truth can change everything in a single moment. Harry's collapse is not the conclusion. It is the beginning of a story that will ripple across nations, across generations, and perhaps across the very future of the monarchy itself. And as we move into the deeper sections, we will peel back each layer, one by one, to understand how this moment came to be and where it might lead. Diana's love life and whispered affairs, making it at least 2,000 words, structured with a beginning, middle, and end, all gripping and detailed, without fluff. I will stop once the section is complete and let you confirm before moving on. The story of Princess Diana's love life has always been told with the weight of tragedy, romance, and betrayal. From the moment she stepped into the public eye, her relationships were never her own. They belonged to the tabloids, to the public imagination, to the endless cycle of speculation. She was the young girl chosen to marry a man much older, already in love with someone else, and bound by the suffocating expectations of monarchy. Her love life became a battlefield where personal longing clashed with royal duty, and the scars of that battle shaped not only her own destiny, but also the lives of her children. To understand how the whispers of Harry's paternity gained such force, one must begin with Diana's romantic history, the affairs that brought her both comfort and condemnation, and the way those whispers were weaponized against her. The beginning of Diana's story is deceptively simple. A shy, 19-year-old girl swept into the orbit of Prince Charles, heir to the British throne. The engagement was framed as a fairy tale, the wedding watched by millions across the globe, but behind the curtains of St. Paul's Cathedral, the fractures were already there. Diana later admitted she went into the marriage with doubts. Charles's heart was never fully hers. His long-standing love for Camilla Parker Bowles was a shadow that followed them from the very start. For Diana, young and inexperienced, the discovery that she was competing with a seasoned woman Charles could never let go of was devastating. This was not a marriage built on passion or devotion. It was a union forged by the demands of the crown. The middle of her married life was defined by loneliness and desperation. Diana found herself isolated in palaces and estates, surrounded by courtiers who regarded her not as a person, but as a duty to be managed. She struggled with bulimia, with depression, with the crushing weight of public expectation. And in that isolation, she sought solace in human connection. Affairs became not just rumors, but lifelines. Each man linked to Diana, whether fleetingly or more seriously, became part of a larger narrative of rebellion against a loveless marriage. James Hewitt, the cavalry officer, is the most infamous of these, but he was far from the only one. Before and after him, there were whispers of other figures. James Gilby, the car dealer whose affectionate phone calls with Diana were captured in the notorious Squidgegate tapes. Oliver Hoare, the art dealer said to have shared secret moments with her. And Dr. Hasnat Khan, the Pakistani heart surgeon whom Diana reportedly loved deeply in the years before her death. Each relationship, whether real or exaggerated, fed the tabloid machine, and each added fuel to the speculation about Diana's heart and her children's parentage. It is within this turbulent middle that James Hewitt enters most forcefully. A handsome cavalry officer, Hewitt was introduced to Diana in the mid-1980s when she sought riding lessons. What began as instruction quickly deepened into companionship, and companionship evolved into intimacy. Hewitt himself later admitted to a 5-year relationship with Diana, though he insisted it began after Prince Harry's birth. The timeline, however, has always been contested. Skeptics have pointed to the physical similarities between Harry and Hewitt. Both share striking red hair, a similar jawline, and a certain rugged charm. The resemblance was too convenient, too tantalizing for a scandal-hungry press to ignore. Tabloids splashed side-by-side comparisons of Harry and Hewitt across front pages, fanning the flames of rumor that Charles was not Harry's real father. Even when confronted with denials, the public imagination clung to the possibility because it aligned so neatly with the tragic narrative of Diana's unhappy marriage. Yet the whispers were never only about Hewitt. The truth is that Diana's openness about her struggles, her candid interviews, and her willingness to admit to affairs made her uniquely vulnerable to speculation. In her explosive panorama interview with Martin Bashir in 1995, Diana confessed, "There were three of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded," referring to Charles and Camilla. But she also admitted to seeking comfort in others, including Hewitt. This rare honesty, intended perhaps to free herself from the burden of secrecy, had the opposite effect. It gave tabloids license to invent, exaggerate, and repeat every rumor about her love life. Suddenly, every man who so much as smiled at Diana could be framed as a potential lover. And every rumor about lovers circled back to one haunting question. What did this mean for her sons? The end of this section draws the threads together. Diana's love life was not just her own. It became a prism through which the monarchy's fragility was exposed. Her affairs, whether real or imagined, symbolized resistance against a system that demanded obedience. They also served as ammunition for those who sought to undermine her, and later, her children. The rumors about Harry's paternity are not simply about biology. They are the culmination of decades of scrutiny, of a woman punished for her humanity, and of a system desperate to preserve its image of continuity. The whispers of affairs gave birth to the whispers of illegitimacy. And those whispers, once planted, never died. They grew, fed by photographs, by speculation, by public doubt, until they became almost inseparable from Harry's identity in the public eye. In truth, Diana's affairs tell us less about her son's bloodlines than about the pain of her life. They reveal a woman who longed for love but was trapped in a loveless institution, who sought solace in those willing to offer her tenderness, who fought back against isolation with the only weapon she had, her humanity, her vulnerability, and her refusal to be silenced. But the price of that resistance was steep. The affairs became the lens through which her children were judged. The whispers became